She promised she'd be back by nightfall, but no one saw her again. One girl, a quiet river, and a secret that would haunt a community for decades. What really happened to Mary Tupin that summer night in Margate? Welcome back to the Story Vault. If you're new here, hit the subscribe button and drop a comment telling us where you're watching from. Your support keeps us uncovering these real-life mysteries. Now, let's step into the small rural settlement of Margate, Prince Edward Island, in the summer of 1887. Margate was not a bustling town. There were no gas lamps lining streets, no central marketplace, and there was certainly no local police station patrolling the lanes. Life was governed by the rhythm of the farm, tending to animals, working the fields, and maintaining a reputation that mattered as much as survival itself. In such a close-knit settlement, every action, every word, carried weight. Families knew one another for generations, and privacy was an illusion. The Tupin family had deep roots here. John and Margaret Tupin had raised 10 children on their modest property near the Southwest River. Among them was Mary Pickering Tupin, a 17-year-old girl known for her quiet, reliable nature. Her siblings often depended on her steadiness, her parents appreciated her obedience, and neighbors regarded her as gentle and dependable. She was the type of girl who blended into the rhythm of everyday life, who smiled politely at adults and helped her younger siblings without complaint. On the evening of June 28, 1887, Mary had attended her younger brother's funeral earlier that day. It had been a day of grief, somber in every sense, and the family was still wrapped in sorrow when Mary quietly said she would step outside for a brief errand. That would be the last time anyone in the Tupin household saw her alive. When night fell, and Mary had not returned, concern grew. Her absence quickly became more than a worry, rather it was now a growing fear. Neighbors and family members organized a search party immediately. People combed the surrounding fields, followed the shallow paths along the river, and even checked the edges of Eel Creek, a small river offshoot where children sometimes played. But there was no trace of Mary. Each hour stretched longer, each darkening sky added tension, and the sense of dread among the community grew. Days passed. On July 2, a discovery heightened the alarm. A small cotton handkerchief, that was carefully embroidered with the letter M, was found near Eel Creek. Mary's mother immediately recognized it as belonging to her daughter. The handkerchief was a tiny, personal clue that whispered of Mary's presence near the water, and with it, fear solidified into a grim realization: something terrible had happened. Volunteers from beyond Margate joined the search, hoping that more clues could be found, but the countryside revealed nothing more until July 11. On that day, Mary's body was discovered in Eel Creek. It had been tied to a large stone, sinking beneath the water's surface as if the river itself had been made to conceal the crime. The stone weighed between 80 and 90 pounds, and the body was decomposed, a chilling testament to the days she had been missing. Bloodstains near the riverbank indicated the likely scene of the murder, and the reality of the tragedy settled like a shadow over the small settlement. The coroner's inquest was convened quickly. Family, neighbors, and local law enforcement gathered to determine what had occurred. Medical examination revealed horrifying details. Mary had been shot twice in the head, one bullet had passed directly through her brain, causing immediate death. She had not drowned, despite her body being found in the water. The lungs contained no water. Her stomach was empty, and there were no defensive wounds, suggesting she had not struggled. But the most shocking revelation was yet to come: Mary Tupin was 6 months pregnant. In 1887, in a small, tightly connected rural community, this fact carried heavy social implications, layering the tragedy with societal judgment and whispers. The verdict was clear: Mary Tupin had been murdered. Yet, who could commit such a crime in a community where everyone knew each other? Suspicion quickly focused on William Millman, a 19-year-old neighbor who lived across the river from the Tupins. Millman's reputation was under scrutiny. When the news spread, hostility surged against him. About 100 wagons blocked his family farm, and angry neighbors called for his hanging. Despite seeking legal counsel, he found no support. and the pressure to identify a culprit in the absence of clear evidence was overwhelming. Millman was arrested and remanded to jail. Thomas Brighton, another resident, was initially arrested but later released. The tension in Margate grew daily. Rumors, whispers, and public outrage coalesced into a community obsession. Everyone had their own theory, their own piece of suspicion. And in the midst of it, the search for justice had to proceed through the measured, deliberate process of the courts. By January 1888, the trial of William Millman began in Charlottetown. Over 11 days, the courtroom became a theater of attention. Every seat was filled, every corner watched, and newspapers sent reporters to relay every development to readers far beyond Prince Edward Island. The prosecution's case was circumstantial but methodical. Witnesses placed Millman near the Tupin farm the night Mary disappeared. Some recalled him concealing his face with a scarf or handkerchief. Others saw him rowing his boat across the river in the hours surrounding the murder. And 2 gunshots had been heard near the Tupin house, adding a grim auditory confirmation of violence. The trial intensified as key witnesses provided testimony. Patrick Power, a neighbor, revealed a chilling interaction. Millman had asked him to give a false alibi. Initially, Power agreed, but as the case progressed, he recanted, explaining the request to the court. His testimony painted a picture of a man attempting to manipulate circumstances, to create a false trail, and to escape responsibility. The jury listened intently, and every detail, no matter how minor, added weight to the narrative of premeditation. The firearm was central to the prosecution's case. Examination revealed that 2 bullets were missing from Millman's revolver. Experts confirmed that the caliber matched the bullets recovered from Mary's skull. This connection, while circumstantial, became a pivotal piece of evidence. Each gunshot, each trajectory, was meticulously analyzed, demonstrating that Mary's death was not accidental. Her life had been taken deliberately. The defense presented 18 witnesses, but their statements largely failed to provide a coherent alternative explanation. Instead, their testimonies created the impression that Millman was hiding something, that he was aware of the suspicions surrounding him, and that he had tried to obscure his movements during the critical hours of Mary's disappearance. The court observed this carefully. Each hesitation, each contradictory account, strengthened the prosecution's narrative. Throughout the trial, the atmosphere was charged. Residents of Margate and visitors from surrounding areas packed the courtroom, eager to witness justice unfold. The judge reminded everyone to remain focused on facts, but the air was thick with tension. Outside the courthouse, people lingered for hours, discussing each revelation. Newspapers printed daily summaries, ensuring that even those who could not attend were swept into the drama. This was more than a trial, it had become a symbol of justice, morality, and the consequences of betrayal in a tightly bound rural community. The prosecution carefully reconstructed the events leading up to Mary's death. Witnesses testified that Millman had been seen rowing across the river late on June 28. Others reported hearing muffled gunshots near the Tupin property. Small details, seemingly insignificant, coalesced into a larger picture. Mary had trusted the wrong person, and the night she left her home, her fate was sealed. Experts described the state of the body and the evidence found at Eel Creek. Mary's body had been tied to a heavy stone, ensuring it would remain hidden beneath the water. Blood at the riverbank indicated that the murder likely occurred there or nearby. The coroner's testimony reinforced the argument that the act was calculated, that it required planning, and that it was executed with the knowledge of its lethal consequences. Millman's demeanor throughout the trial remained mostly composed, though moments of visible tension were noted by observers. He attempted to claim innocence, suggesting that the evidence was circumstantial and insufficient. He argued that the missing bullets could have other explanations and that witness statements were inconsistent. However, each assertion was countered by carefully structured evidence and corroborating testimony from multiple sources. As days passed, the courtroom witnessed a detailed examination of Millman's movements, his interactions, and the seemingly trivial choices he made before and after Mary's disappearance. These details, while minor on the surface, provided a cohesive timeline, showing opportunity, intent, and consciousness of guilt. The prosecution emphasized that Mary had been vulnerable, that she trusted her neighbor, and that her death was not a spontaneous act but one of deliberate, cruel planning. The defense tried to introduce doubt by focusing on the absence of direct eyewitnesses to the murder itself. They argued that no one had seen Millman commit the crime, and therefore guilt could not be conclusively proven. Yet, the circumstantial evidence, gunshots, witness observations, the missing bullets, and the disposal of the body, painted a narrative that the jury found increasingly persuasive. Throughout the trial, tension built over every statement. The jury was attentive, absorbing each testimony, weighing each piece of evidence. Outside, the public followed fervently. For many, the trial represented more than just the death of Mary Tupin. It symbolized justice for a community and a warning about the dangers that could lurk even among familiar faces. The prosecution also highlighted Millman's behavior after the murder. Witnesses testified that he seemed evasive, attempted to mislead others, and created conditions that would confuse investigators. These actions were presented as evidence of a consciousness of guilt. Each attempt to obscure his involvement became another thread in the web of circumstantial evidence. The courtroom drama reached its climax as the prosecution summarized its case. They meticulously linked each witness's testimony, each piece of physical evidence, and each expert observation into a coherent narrative. Mary Tupin had been deliberately targeted, killed, and her body concealed in a manner that reflected forethought and awareness of the consequences. The jury was left with little room for doubt. This was a premeditated act of murder, executed in cold blood. Finally, the defense concluded its argument, emphasizing inconsistencies in witness statements and arguing for leniency or doubt. Yet, the weight of the evidence presented by the prosecution overshadowed these claims. The jury retired to deliberate, a heavy sense of responsibility settling over their decision. Their task was monumental, to assess not just a young girl's tragic death, but the truth hidden beneath layers of fear, secrecy, and deception. After several hours, the jury returned. Their verdict was pronounced: William Millman was found guilty of the murder of Mary Tupin. The courtroom reacted with a mixture of relief, horror, and quiet satisfaction. Justice, as the community understood it, had been served. Despite a recommendation for mercy, the judge handed down the sentence, death by hanging, reflecting the brutal premeditation and cruelty of the crime. Millman remained composed but resolute in his claims of innocence. He was led from the courtroom, aware that the sentence would be carried out publicly in Charlottetown. Preparations began for the execution, and the community braced itself for the final act in a tragedy that had gripped them for months. Even after the verdict, the story did not fade from public memory. Mary's family mourned privately, constrained by grief and the social stigma attached to the circumstances of her death. Her father and mother continued life with a shadow cast by the violence inflicted on their daughter, while neighbors reflected on the fragility of trust and the darkness that could exist even in small, familiar communities. The weeks leading to the execution were tense. Millman attempted an escape in late March, an act that failed, reinforcing the inevitability of the sentence. Finally, on April 10, 1888, William Millman was executed publicly. Crowds gathered to witness the hanging, a stark reminder of 19th-century justice and the societal belief in public punishment as deterrence. Mary Tupin's tragic story had reached its legal conclusion, but the impact of her death would resonate for generations, shaping memory and cautionary tales across Margate and beyond. Even after Millman's execution, questions lingered in Margate. The community could not fully reconcile the brutality of Mary's death with the familiar face of her neighbor. Parents worried over the safety of their children, and whispers spread about hidden motives and unspoken secrets. The memory of Mary Tupin became a cautionary tale, a reminder of how trust could be exploited, even in the quietest of settlements. In the months following the execution, the Tupin family struggled to regain a sense of normalcy. Their grief was compounded by the fact that Mary's head had been removed for further examination after the post-mortem, leaving the family unable to conduct a proper burial for their daughter. This absence added a haunting dimension to their mourning, a quiet injustice that lingered for decades. Community members reflected on the investigation itself. The work of the coroner, law enforcement, and witnesses had been painstaking, reconstructing the sequence of events from fragmentary evidence. Each small detail, footprints, witness statements, the embroidered handkerchief, was scrutinized to build the narrative that eventually led to Millman's conviction. The meticulous nature of the investigation reassured some but left others pondering how such a tragedy could unfold unnoticed until it was too late. As time passed, the story of Mary Tupin became part of local lore. Parents recounted the events to their children, warning them to be cautious around strangers and even familiar acquaintances. The tale was told not just as a murder story, but as a lesson in vigilance, trust, and the dark consequences of deception. The community's collective memory of that summer in 1887 remained vivid, shaping attitudes toward neighbors, newcomers, and the safety of young women. In 2016, a remarkable discovery renewed attention on the case. Mary Tupin's skull, long separated from her body, was found in a former coroner's office building that had since been converted into a restaurant. The rediscovery brought both relief and closure to historians and descendants alike. The skull was carefully reburied alongside Mary's body in Margate, restoring dignity to a young woman whose death had been both brutal and overlooked in certain respects for over a century. This act of reburial symbolized more than the restoration of remains. It was a modern acknowledgement of historical wrongs, a recognition of Mary's humanity, and a subtle act of justice that could not undo the past but could honor the memory of the victim. Scholars and local historians documented the event, noting how the case illustrated broader societal issues, from rural justice and legal practices to the stigmatization of unmarried pregnant women in the late 19th century. Throughout the years, the case file of Mary Tupin remained preserved in the provincial archives. Researchers examining these documents noted the precision with which investigators reconstructed events, the thoroughness of witness interviews, and the reliance on circumstantial evidence to establish guilt. Each page revealed the painstaking effort required to prosecute a crime in an era without modern forensic technology. It was a testament to both the dedication of the authorities and the limitations imposed by geography, technology, and social norms. For Margate, the story left a lasting legacy. Families spoke of Mary Tupin not merely as a victim, but as a symbol of vulnerability, resilience, and the consequences of misplaced trust. The tragedy reinforced communal bonds as neighbors watched over one another more closely, aware that even the most ordinary routines could harbor danger. The lessons from 1887 extended beyond Margate, contributing to broader discussions about justice, community responsibility, and the treatment of women in rural society. The trial itself remained a landmark in the legal history of Prince Edward Island. While the conviction of William Millman relied entirely on circumstantial evidence, it demonstrated the court's ability to interpret complex scenarios, weigh testimony, and render a verdict that reflected both the facts and the societal expectations of the time. Legal scholars have since examined the case as an example of how 19th-century courts navigated challenges that modern investigators might solve with forensic science and technology. Mary's family, despite enduring the pain of loss, were ultimately comforted by the attention paid to their daughter's memory. The combination of historical documentation, rediscovery of her remains, and public remembrance ensured that Mary Tupin would not be forgotten. Her story, though tragic, became a lens through which subsequent generations could examine issues of morality, justice, and social responsibility. The rediscovery of Mary's skull and the subsequent reburial also sparked renewed interest in the settlement of Margate. Historians and journalists visited the area, exploring the river, the creek, and the landscape that had shaped the events of June 1887. These visits highlighted the intimate connection between geography and crime, the isolation of the creek, the proximity of neighbors, and the rhythms of rural life that both facilitated and constrained human behavior. Modern audiences studying the case are struck by the stark contrast between the community's quiet life and the sudden intrusion of violent crime. Mary Tupin had lived a life defined by family, modesty, and responsibility. Her sudden death, executed with precision and hidden in plain sight, exposed the fragility of safety and trust, even in a close-knit environment. The juxtaposition of ordinary daily life and extraordinary violence made the case particularly poignant and memorable. For educators, the Tupin case offers lessons across multiple disciplines. It serves as a historical case study in criminal justice, highlighting procedural methods, reliance on eyewitness testimony, and the interpretation of circumstantial evidence. It also provides insight into social history, illustrating attitudes toward women, pregnancy, and moral conduct in rural Canada. The story demonstrates how individual tragedies can reflect broader societal values and challenges, making it a rich subject for analysis and discussion. In recounting the events of June 28, 1887, and the subsequent investigation, trial, and reburial, one observes a narrative of human error, societal constraints, and resilience. Mary Tupin's life and death, preserved through meticulous record-keeping and historical scholarship, continue to teach and warn. Her story transcends the immediate tragedy, emphasizing the enduring importance of truth, justice, and remembrance in human communities. The final chapters of Mary Tupin's story remind us that even in the quietest communities, darkness can creep unnoticed. The Tupin family endured unimaginable loss, yet their resilience became part of the legacy. They lived with the memory of Mary, the unanswered questions, and the decades-long absence of her remains, all while ensuring that the story of her life and death would not fade. William Millman's execution closed the legal chapter, but it did not erase the imprint of the crime on Margate. Conversations in homes, churches, and markets often return to the events of June 1887, a mixture of fear, sorrow, and the lessons learned. Parents warned daughters and sons, neighbors watched one another more closely, and the community's fabric was subtly altered, shaped by collective trauma. The rediscovery of Mary's skull in 2016 offered a form of closure long denied. Finally reunited with her body, Mary Tupin could rest in dignity, her memory honored, and her story complete. Historians and descendants reflected on the passage of time, noting how justice, remembrance, and recognition sometimes require decades to converge. The case became emblematic of how society can revisit past wrongs, acknowledge victims, and provide symbolic restitution. Mary Tupin's story resonates beyond Margate. It speaks to universal truths about trust, vulnerability, and the consequences of actions taken in secrecy. It also illustrates how communities respond to tragedy, balancing grief with the need for understanding and closure. In this sense, her life and untimely death serve as both a cautionary tale and a reflection on human resilience in the face of injustice. For those who study history, criminal justice, or social dynamics, the Tupin case demonstrates the power of careful documentation and witness testimony. Every scrap of evidence, every observation, and every recorded action contributed to the eventual verdict. The trial and investigation, while imperfect by modern standards, show the lengths to which individuals and institutions went to seek truth and accountability. As we remember Mary Tupin, we also reflect on the broader lessons of her story, the importance of vigilance, the necessity of questioning appearances, and the enduring impact of crimes that ripple through families and communities. The narrative reminds us that even a life led quietly, with diligence and care, can intersect tragically with deceit and violence. Thank you for staying with us through this story. If you found Mary Tupin's journey and the investigation compelling, make sure to subscribe to the Story Vault, leave a comment telling us where you're watching from, and like the video. Your support helps us continue bringing forgotten stories and historical mysteries to light. Stories like Mary Tupin's remind us why history matters, not just for what happened, but for the lessons we carry forward. And here, at the Story Vault, we honor the lives, the mysteries, and the truths that time cannot erase. Stay curious, stay vigilant, and never forget the stories that shape our past and inform our present.